Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Michael. My pronouns are he, they. I'm based in the UK. Brief visual description for anyone who needs it. I am white, male presenting, in my 30s, got some stubble, actually need a shave. Brown, kind of coiffed hair, wearing a black t-shirt, and behind me there's a bed with far too many cushions and some soft atmospheric lighting, and yeah, a plant that I actually can't believe is still alive. Thank you all for joining us. For those who have been here before, welcome back. Lovely to see you again. To those who are new, welcome. And as I said, do introduce yourself in the chat. The live transcript is also available for anyone who would like that as well. So as I said, my name is Michael. I'm the founder of We Create Space. For those who don't know, we're a global non-profit platform and community and collective of queer changemakers. And we're on a mission to improve the lives of LGBTQ plus people around the world. And we do this by connecting our communities and allies with tools, with knowledge, and also fundamentally a support network for personal growth, for self-care and queer leadership. And we do that through shared experiences, through content creation, and also consultancy as well. We're also hosting our first annual Pride events this year in the UK. A pre-Pride summit on May 13th, and also a post-Pride retreat 4th till 6th of July. It's an opportunity for queer leaders to come together. We're going to be offering an exciting schedule of classes, workshops, discussions. Registration opens at the end of February, so do get in touch if you're interested. And we're also still looking for corporate partners as well who might want to support us. Now, on to today's session. So you might have attended actually one of the 6 sessions we delivered last year in partnership with My G Work. If you did, you will have heard us talk a lot about queer leadership, and that for us, queer leadership isn't just about representation, about visibility or achievement or even hierarchy, what's on the outside. But really, queer leadership for us is about also looking inwards. It's about understanding who we are and then using that knowledge as fuel to instigate positive change within our communities and our organizations. And in this new series, so this year, we're going to be delivering sessions monthly again, but each one is going to have a different facilitator and a different guest speaker. But we're going to continue to explore leadership through an intersectional lens, really kind of delving into identity as well as looking at practical tools and techniques for managing mental health, physical health, and emotional health. Why? Because we believe that really with greater levels of well-being and understanding of self, we naturally become more compassionate, more powerful, and more authentic as leaders. And we become more intuitive with our decisions as well, and more intentional with how we show up to support other people. So when we're practicing queer leadership, we're often called to challenge the norm or the status quo. We're not just existing within the heteronormative patriarchal structures that have been put in place to prevent us from getting into those positions of power. So we actually create space for new, exciting possibilities as individuals, as leaders, but also as just community members, so members of the LGBTQ plus community. But how can we actually challenge and what impact do we hope to see from the conversations that we've been having at We Create Space with our corporate partners, with our collective, and with our community members as well? Lots of individuals are still really struggling to keep LGBTQ plus programming on the agenda. They're still really struggling to diversify the C-suite, even struggling.
Michael, I think your sound is cut out.
Oh, is that better? Is that okay? Is that okay now? Yeah. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. I'm joined by Zach and Bachel, who are going to be delivering today's session, and also Ellie, who's going to be on hand to help with any tech issues. Hopefully, there won't be any more. Would you all like to say hello and introduce yourselves?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are located. Exciting to see in the chat just how geographically diverse this group is. My name is Zachary Ames. I use he, him pronouns. I've been a corporate facilitator for about almost going on 15 years in various spaces and lived abroad, both in Singapore most recently. I was in New York before that, in Fortune 500 companies, as well as big privately owned financial firms, and recently peeled off and have started my own coaching and consulting practice. As a very simple and quick visual description, male, 30 presenting, blonde, coiffed hair, similar to Michael. Bookshelf behind me, brand new from IKEA, with a sign up top and lights that says XYZ lead. Got a flower vase in the top corner and a painting of a tin toy robot just above my right shoulder.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bachel Cole. My pronouns are they, them. I've been really fortunate to have partnered with We Create Space on a few of these before. I really love this community. I'm happy to be here today. I started my career in financial services, and then after 2008 and the Great Reset, I found my way into about a decade-long career in management consulting, which took me all around the world in different projects. And then just about 8 months ago, I joined Aegon Zender, a global executive search and leadership advisory firm. So a lot of this top of the house discussion, topic, makeup, it's very much core to what I'm focusing on now. And originally I'm from Kashmir. I came to the US when I was very little, grew up in New Jersey, but with very strong ties to home and to family. My brief visual description. So I have, I like to say I'm bottle presenting. I have short salt and pepper hair, shaved on the sides, wearing blue rimmed glasses, and I've got big Bose over-ear headphones on against a sterile white background because I'm actually in an Airbnb this week. So no fun artwork today.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to see everybody here. I am Ellie. I present as she, her, and I am going to be looking after if anybody needs any support or would like any support, you can message me directly in the chat. I am working at We Create Space as community events and marketing manager, so looking after hosting these sessions and in-person sessions too. So a brief description of mine is I have a buzz cut shaved head and I'm wearing a cardigan with cherries all over. In the background, I've got some artwork hanging and plants hanging, and yeah, that's mine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to just take a few minutes now actually to do a short breathing exercise. If you've been to one of our sessions before, you know we do that at the start of every session just to calm the mind so that we can be present and that we can focus on the information that we're going to be presenting. So it's only going to be a couple of minutes. So don't worry if you've never done meditation before, but just take a kind of comfortable seat, and if you feel comfortable you can close your eyes, or you can look down, or you can just keep a gaze in the distance. And I just want you to start by taking a few long deep breaths. So just starting with a slow deep belly breath, holding for a moment, and then gently releasing that breath. And you can breathe in through the nose and then out through the mouth. So you're just going to in for 4, hold for 4, and then out for 4. So if you just go in, hold, release, and just really feel the belly expanding as you breathe in. And just repeat that pattern a few times. If you can't hold it for 4 seconds, don't worry, just go with 3. But just focusing on the inhaling slowly, holding for a moment, and then releasing your breath. One more. And just relax your breathing now so it's natural. And as you inhale and release your next exhale next, I want you to soften anything that can be softened. Maybe you've got some rigidity or tension in the body that needs softening. Perhaps it's your forehead. I know I'm always squinting when I'm at the computer. Maybe it's your jaw, your shoulders, your belly. Just soften those. Maybe it's active thoughts in the mind. Start of the day, lots to do. Maybe it's the mind that needs softening. Or maybe there's some stirring emotions that need softening. Just soften whatever needs softening, whether it's in the body or the mind. And just stay with that throughout the whole session, focusing on your breath. Okay, when you're ready, come back to this space, and I'm going to pass you over to Zach.
All right. Thank you for that. I know I definitely needed that in my shoulders is where I hold mine. So we are very excited to be here today and to be presenting this workshop. We do recognize with the number of people, which is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for not only signing up, but for showing up. But it will be much more of a webinar style. So there's not the breakout rooms and not a lot of opportunity to come off mute and chat and those things. But we do have a chat function. We also have a Q&A function. So if you do have anything as we are discussing, feel free to pop that in. There will be a designated time near the end of the session where we can actually have questions and respond to those. So we may not be responding to everything in real time, but it will be a great log for us to review as we're going through. So with that diving in, I can also tell you firsthand, similar to Michael, many of my clients that I've been speaking with are in a weird and interesting position at the moment when it comes to diversity, particularly when the pandemic hit. Here in the United States, parallel to all of that was the George Floyd murder. There were many other things that have sparked and shifted the way that diversity is being discussed and looked at in a corporate space. As part of all of those shifts, one of the results, as Michael mentioned, is in many instances, it feels like a deprioritization of some of the LGBTQ priorities. And so we want to discuss today, how do we raise our voice appropriately and effectively to create the change we want to see? So with that, what I would love for us to do is grab a sheet of paper, or if you're at a computer, pull up a blank document so that you can respond to a few questions, because we need the context of what you're trying to accomplish in order to then lay in any of the tools, tips, processes that we might share together so that we can effectively then marry this all up. If we just jump in too quickly into how to do it, it becomes a little too academic. So I want us to all think about our personal situation, what drove us to this call, and what are we trying to accomplish? So with that, that is ultimately the very first question. So take a moment and respond for yourself. What is it that you are looking to accomplish? And I recognize, again, very exciting that on this call we have people from all over, and that also then means I have a feeling we have some people who are working in major corporations that might have 10, 20, 50 plus thousand employees. So what you're trying to maybe accomplish there will look a little different than maybe someone who just joined a tech startup and there's only 10 of you, right? Or maybe you're actually a community activist or working in the space of politics. So what is it that you are trying to accomplish? What is the end goal, or what would success look like? Now, within that, I want you to consider this and break that apart into two pieces. One, what is your long-term goal? If that wasn't the initial one already, think about that a little bit more. If your goal was simply to get a community space created, well, is that really the long-term goal? And maybe it is, that's great. But maybe the long-term goal is actually shifting the cultural view and the way we think and talk, that we're actually, no pun intended to Michael's company name here, but if you're looking actually to create space for members of that community, which is a little bit different than the actual physical, maybe, space. Now, what would the short-term goal of that be? Are you just looking to secure funding? Are you looking to educate? Are you looking to put a board together? What are some of those things that might actually be within the next 3, 6 months, and sometimes even short-term can be 12 months. For those of you that have worked in corporate spaces, getting something accomplished in 12 months is often quite not only a success, but considered a little short-term. So as you have all that laid out, I just want you to frame kind of those tent poles so that we're clear in the landscape where you are hoping and looking to play in. Now, with that, what I would love for you to do now is put your fingers over your keyboard and click on the chat. I know many of you know how to do that. We've already seen many of these wonderful responses of where you are. And I have a very simple question for you. I don't want you to give it a lot of thought. Just a quick yes or no, or a Y or an N for yes or no. If you're ready, does a farmer grow food? Does a farmer grow food? Okay. Seeing a slew of yeses and a few no's, and the longer we're going with it, the longer people are sitting with the question, we're seeing a couple more no's coming into the mix. Now, this isn't meant to be an overly difficult riddle, but I do think it is an excellent analogy for what maybe you are trying to accomplish. We are the farmers in this scenario, and in reality, farmers do not grow food. The only thing they can do is cultivate an environment. whereby then the food itself grows, right? That kernel of corn, that is springing to life itself. That cow is continuing to grow and get bigger and produce milk as it gets the certain things that it needs in its life. So what are those things, and how do we, as farmers of this change, what are we needing to do? I think one of the big things for us to first understand is, what do the people we are seeking, right? Maybe some of this executive leadership or others that we are trying to challenge. We first need to understand what they want and what they need in relationship to what we want and we need. So your next question in your little journal or wherever you're writing some notes, the big question for you now is, what first, can you identify who you are trying to influence? And once you know that, the next big question is, what do they want to accomplish? What does that person or that group of individuals, agnostic of your agenda, generally speaking, if you were to ask them over dinner, what is it you are looking to accomplish in your role? What would they say? Then when you have that, split it again, similar to what we did as well. What is their long-term goal? So from a company and corporate perspective, right? The easiest and simplest one is long-term year-over-year growth, in particular when it comes to shareholder earnings, right? Short-term could be a lot of other things, right? Do we know their expansion goals? Do we know what the growth strategy looks like? Maybe you're not trying to go challenge the CEO, maybe it's the head of a team or a department, and they have specific goals and agendas and priorities. I can tell you, having lived in that corporate churn, these goals are already set. Most of this happens in late fall of the year prior. The year is already gone ahead, budgets are set, we are moving forward, we know what we want to accomplish. Do you know what they want to accomplish? Now, why is this important to understand this relationship and what's happening here? Another little analogy to push the farmer piece a little further. Many of us through the pandemic became plant parents, right? And what you've probably discovered in that journey is that some of your plants love sitting in the window and getting a ton of light, and others want to be in the corner and get a little minimal amount of light. Similarly, the amount of water each of those needs. And sometimes it's frustrating. You're like, I'm watering it every day. Why isn't it growing? And the reality is it doesn't need that much. You actually are probably flooding it. So the other piece of this is to recognize that we can't just take one single strategy for every single person in a position of power, right? Sorry, Sunit, to hear that your cactus died. It was probably too much water. And that's a perfect example, right? Cactuses and cacti are desert plants. They are used to a lack of water. Their systems are built to store and retain and then let it out over time. So if we are coming in at our leadership with a ton of water, whatever that might look like for us, but they don't need it or it's not helpful to them and their goals, it's going to be really hard for us to foster the relationship that we need. So in all this, we then need to think about, we in this moment get to be the catalyst for change. And sometimes that is really important to align and not alienate, especially if those people are already started the journey. Now, one of the frustrations of individuals like us probably is that we are already further along in that journey. And this is one of my big challenges as I go and consult with companies, is many of my co-facilitators or people that I work with, they want to go and say, this is where, not just where you are, but saying you're really far behind and we need you to be over here. Welcome to 2022. And in our chat here in a moment, I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about Gen Z, and I can tell you, and it's one of my warnings, is like Gen Z is already so much further ahead, and you as a company, like, you better just be ready. Get there, right? And while that is true, we also have to acknowledge and honor where they are, because most of us didn't just jump to this far end. there were steps and stages. And sometimes any learning curve, when we accomplish it and get to a higher level of mastery, we sometimes forget the basics or the fundamentals or the process that it took to get us there. So in that ability to be a catalyst for change, right? Trying not to alienate the people who are already making some progress. Sometimes we tell them they're not good enough or they need to be better, and that's actually going to push them back. So how do we actually bring them forward? And start to think about this. How do we start to align that agenda of ours with theirs? How do you align your agenda so there's a win-win, so that they are compelled to give you what you want, give you what you need? Some of that might look like raising a mirror, right? And most companies have corporate competencies, have corporate values. That's one of the big concerns right now. In the US, again, there's a whole series going around from big political thing that's happened, and companies publicly saying, we will not support that, we do not stand for this. And now all of a sudden it's being revealed the amount of dollars that are being spent actually against what they publicly claimed and said. So if you know where someone stands or they've already said that, it's a great tool for you to come and lay that out and say, how is this showing up? How are you breathing into this? More importantly, how are you not living up to this standard that they've set? It's not your standard, it's theirs. And using their language to help fuel what you are trying to accomplish. There's also probably a lot of opportunity in that alignment, right? And we can talk more after our chat what this might look like in some practical terms. But if we know a company in particular, I'll continue to use that because I think that's probably the majority of us here. If their goal is this revenue and stakeholder or shareholder profitability, how then does greater access, greater representation, greater advocacy help accomplish that? And that is actually one of the disconnects for many senior leaders. It's not that they disagree that supporting people is good or having an inclusive environment is good, but that next step, what does that do? How does that help create a positive work environment, which then leads to my productivity? Or vice versa? What is the opportunity, not just opportunity cost of this moment, but what is the cost of inaction? And actually, as we were prepping, one of the individuals shared and actually said, the reason I left was because I didn't find the space I was looking for. And that is a talent drain. And that's a really big piece and opportunity for conversation, right? If we don't do the things we've said we're going to do, not only is that then dissonance, but we're going to lose talent. And I can tell you, having worked in HR for ages, the cost of going out and hiring someone is very high. So if we can reduce that churn and actually maintain positive work environment and continue to foster the growth and development of the employees we have and attract amazing talent along the way. And again, in 2022, the expectation is just to have diverse companies. If your company's not on board, your company's probably not going to last. So there's a few things that we can hold up, particularly in that mirror perspective. Then once you understand the alignment, a great point to understand is, where is the tension? So where do they disagree? So I want us to do one more little writing exercise, and then I'm going to shift over and bring in Bachel for a conversation. But the final few questions for you to stew on is, what does that person or that group, what do they currently believe? And that could be both generally, their worldview. It could also be about the topic in perspective. What is it that they believe about this? Are they already in agreement, right? Are they, again, speaking at panels and supportive, and they believe this is the right thing to do, but maybe there's still a little bit more? What do they know? So an organization I'm working with at the moment, we've been on a really interesting journey in the last month or two around LGBT, just kind of the 101 of language, pronouns, what's okay to say, what's not okay, what is the current, dictionary that we have. And a lot of them, because of just purely their generation, it was very different. They were unaware of some of the advancements that we've made. And so our knowledge and their knowledge was different, and we needed to align on that. But the reality is, if I didn't know that before, it would have been a massive tension point there. So similarly, not only what they know, but what don't they know? And ultimately, do they agree or disagree? This is going to help frame and shape everything that you then bring to the table. So instead of what I've seen sometimes is people are so strong in this capital A agenda of we need this, and they go in and almost like with such vigor that they actually end up pushing the person away, as opposed to aligning and saying, hey, we know you believe in this and we're so grateful for X, Y, and Z support. Here's what we're looking to accomplish next. They're already bought in. You don't need to convince them. Now, some people are not bought in, and we do need to convince them, and that's going to take a lot more work. So that's where I want to pause for a moment and bring in Bachel to have a conversation around some of their experience, their perspective on this topic. And then after that, I will wrap up with a few pieces that we can look at together, and maybe some tips and techniques, or even a couple models to bring this all together to actually put it into action. So Bachel, do you want to come off your mute and your camera, and we can have a little chat?
Yeah, Michael, I think, or the host might have to take the camera back on camera.
Out of control there.
There we go.
Beautiful. Awesome. So again, thank you for joining us. Excited to be speaking with you. So First and foremost, you've given a little bit of the introduction of just the general career piece, but can you tell us a little bit more about your personal leadership journey, I suppose? And were there any barriers that you faced as you climbed the quote unquote corporate ladder?
Yeah, and let me start by saying too, so I want to frame a bit of context for folks. I'll be 42 in just a couple of months, which I think places me right at the cusp of Gen X, and I think what they're calling like either elder or geriatric millennial. I'm fine with all, it doesn't matter. But I spent the first 37 years of my life thinking that there was only two choices, gay or lesbian. I didn't know about the trans community. I didn't know about the non-binary community. So I spent a big portion of my early life as a very butch lesbian, finding myself having to adapt into toxically masculine spaces. And then when I was 37, I came out again personally and professionally as trans and non-binary. And so I'm in a little bit of a different place, because I think there are some things that our community has to do in order to prepare ourselves for this next shift. So as you said, Gen Z is coming, and I am with them 100% of the way. I think there's been a lot of gatekeeping in our community. And if you look, like I remember when I was coming up, the heads of the LGBTQ ERGs were often cis white men. And, it's great because, well, they were the ones who were able to advance to the executive positions first. But I think there's some sort of, come to whatever moment that our community needs to do in how we've sort of gate kept who's allowed to be a part of what conversation. And and I think I followed, the obstacles I think I faced was because I was following this mindset of, be gentle, meet people where they're at, don't make them feel judged. Don't, you kind of put all this pressure on yourself. And if I'm being honest, I think I'm at a little bit of a place right now where, I think we've been feeding ourselves a false narrative on that front. And I'm ready to rabble rouse, and I'm ready to join forces across different groups. I think, one of the questions in the Q&A is a great question. I actually think that the LGBTQ plus community, it if you talk to the Black community in the US, if you talk to the Latinx community, if you talk to the South Asian, East Asian, all of us are facing similar flavors of different things. And so where I've seen a lot of success is actually in creating coalitions across the different groups, because I'm not just queer and trans, non-binary, I'm South Asian, and so by trying to lean into one or the other, I think it does all of our communities a little bit of a disservice. So, you face these very powerful people, right, who hold your career, your financial well-being, in a lot of cases, your mental health, your physical health in their hands. And so I recognize that I'm in a position of privilege right now where I have a little bit more control and agency over my income and my existence, which I didn't have when I was coming up, And so when I look back, I think a lot of the harm was self-inflicted because we were kind of told, or everybody is kind of told, yes, diversity we need to focus on the positives. Let's focus on the 100% HRC CEI score. Let's focus on all the awards that we submit ourselves for as companies, no matter what industry you're in. And I think a lot of, there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of frustration, and there's a lot of emotion in all of our communities that I think has a place. And so, you're kind of seeing it play out here in the US on quite a large stage right now, because we're finding our voice and our strength in numbers.
Yeah. So can I ask, so I think that's an excellent strategy, is solidarity and numbers and bringing others along, right? There's absolutely power in the group. To your point earlier of wanting to shake things up, I love that. I completely believe in that in a goal and a strategy. And recognizing also, as you said, though, there are people who are in positions of power, and actually there can be an impact on you depending on what you do and say. And that's unfortunately one of the downsides of just the way corporate life is structured, is there is a bit of a game being played of like, how do I navigate this space and create change, because that's what people or companies say they want, right? To innovate and grow, and yet not be such a change maker that you're a disruption. And there's always this tightrope we seem to walk. So then you add in something like a diversity agenda, which again, everyone has different points of views and different comfort levels. How have you navigated that? Because you've even mentioned you're not just the privilege, but I would probably relate that to you probably build up actually the political capital that you can expend to start to shake things up a little bit more, right? You can afford whatever cost might come. So how do you balance that? And for people on the call, either experience or just kind of your thought process in terms of, I want to make change, but I also need to look out for myself.
Yeah. Great, thank you. That's a great question. And it's kind of like you have to look for spotters. Okay, so I've always usually taken more of the disruptor path. And I'll talk about why in a second. But what I did before I knew I was going to do something that potentially would put me in the crosshairs or on someone's bad side, right, would be I'd find an ally that was at the same level in the organization from a leadership perspective. And I would sort of say, I'm not asking their permission, but I would let them know, hey, I think you care about me as a person. This is what I'm facing. And so here's what I'm going to do. And I need you to back me up. Right. And so you have to create these little coalitions, because going it alone is really challenging and just lonely. And you get to the end of the day and you're just, every day you feel like you're fighting, you're lunging at windmills. And so you find a coalition of both community members of your community members of other communities, and then allies to sort of have your back. And so, and to sort of restate what you said, to reinforce it. And so you're not the only voice saying it. But I think, this, when I say the context for what we're going through, I think in a lot of people's minds, because RuPaul's Drag Race exists, or because certain people have broken through, that our community, the LGBTQ plus community, like, oh, we've come so far. But in the US, if you look at it, 2022 is already on par to be the most dangerous year from anti-LGBTQ legislation. There's a bill right now going on in Florida called Don't Say Gay, where they will ban teaching about the LGBTQ plus community in schools. And so, this is where, for me, it's a little bit of like, okay, let's get our coalitions together. And it's the same thing is happening for my Black siblings. They're trying to block the teaching of slavery, the teaching of the civil rights movement. It is just, we are in an epic flashpoint right now, I think, across our communities. And so for me, it feels like this is a time to really connect and collaborate and, and kind of show that, look, you're not, it's not just me shouting into the wind, but we all have something to say on this topic.
Absolutely. And as we look at that, and I think one of the challenges often is sometimes when we lift our head up, it actually gets overwhelming. When you really take in and digest just how much is happening, not, as you said, not just to us, but to our siblings, and it feels daunting. So I would say there's a great moment, though, for our allies to help us in that journey, that we don't always have to be the one to carry that full burden. So I'm curious from your perspective, and I've even run, as part of my work, many allyship sessions, and there's now new words out there of advocate and accomplice and all these A words. But I'm curious, what is it that you think, and hopefully there are maybe some allies on this call, but also for us as we're speaking with those allies, again, hoping to draw them in and not alienate them, what is something more that they can do than just put on their pronouns or walk in the Pride March with us? There's a lot of stuff that they do, which I don't think is purely performative, but it doesn't do a lot at the same time. Mm-hmm. So what is something that they can do? And also, how do we hold them accountable in those spaces as well, whether that's our allies or maybe just leadership more broadly?
I think our allies can similarly do what I know a lot of us are doing for other communities, which is educating ourselves. Rather than going to someone in the community and asking them to teach you about the different letters in LGBTQ plus, or what do pronouns mean, or, teach me about trans people. I had a colleague set up a call that I actually thought was about a work-related thing. And my colleague just dove into a discussion on pronouns and non-binary. And I'm always happy to have that conversation, but it was just one of those things where, Google is your friend. I think Google is your friend, allies. And I think there's like a baseline of self-education that would be super helpful in sort of even framing that first conversation, right? Framing that first conversation with someone about, here's what I understand, here's how I think I can be helpful, and it's, for me, that's a little bit of the conversations I've been having with some of my friends is go listen, don't just listen to me, listen to other queer voices, listen to other South Asian voices, listen to other Black voices, listen to people who are in the community, because you're gonna hear a lot of different elements of what's happening to each of us. And then I think for me, the biggest thing is helping them understand that we're not just asking for help to make us happier, right? Like, this isn't about how can I breeze through life gleefully, right, and joyously. We are living and operating within systems that are wrecked with bias. And so it's finding an ally who may be an executive in supply chain, or an ally who might be doing recruiting, or an ally who might be in the bank lending or home lending process, and say, do you want to help me out? Find out how your algorithms or your processes are preventing my community from having access to your product or services, and eliminate it. Because that for me is the shift of, I think there are a lot of people who hear us and they think we just want like this life, that it's like qualitative life improvement, when actually all of us, I think, are fighting for a more equitable and inclusive system, right? So it's a little bit of like, I don't know if anybody's been watching the Matrix remake, or if there's a lot of younger people who don't know that the Wachowski sisters transition, and it's actually a trans allegory. And I definitely feel like I've taken the red pill and I'm kind of on the other side of it. And so just helping other folks get to that place where they see the bias in the system, I think could be incredibly powerful. So it's like, don't just stand up with me and join me in June for Pride Month, but look at your day-to-day job. Are you seeing discrimination? Are you seeing bias? Highlight it, eradicate it, and take up the mantle on your own.
Love it. So I'll keep you on because I think I've got just a couple of key points maybe to talk about tools and strategies or ways of framing some stuff, and then we can jump into Q&A, seeing some great stuff. I will say the chat, because we do have so many people on, if you asked a question earlier, it's probably gotten lost, but there is a Q&A function, which I think right now only has about 10. So feel free to pop your question in there. My apologies on timing. We will not be able to get to everyone and everything, but I think so far we've had a really great discussion in this space, and hopefully sparked something that you can take with you further, not only to think about, but to start to action. So a couple of quick points that I loved what you said there, Bachel, around find the head of that supply chain, or find someone over here who is already in your corner, but also, again, has maybe some political weight and some power to start to shift things, but also, again, that we can hold them accountable, maybe in the smaller piece of that system versus trying to go to the CEO. Now, that doesn't mean we can't go to the CEO. I think especially if you've got numbers, let's take it there. A big piece that I think, as I was listening to you, there's really power in moving. I think there's a combination of things. I know when I've talked to people recently and shared about, as you've talked about, this anti-trans legislation, we've never seen more of it before. It's not just to say that, and I think some people are actually quite shocked and they're unaware that it's even happening. But the bigger piece is like, what is the impact? And I think that's a piece we often miss out. And I believe in all these spaces, there is a combination of the data and the intel, as well as that impact, right? Thinking a little bit about head and heart. And the more that we can, whether it's personalizing it or maybe it's not directly to you, right? That anti-trans legislation, I'm not trans, so maybe it doesn't feel as direct, but I have plenty in my community who I've had those conversations with, and I can actually speak on their behalf. I can be their ally in those moments. And what that looks like when an employee is trying to come to work and trying to concentrate and trying to do, something great and grow and develop themselves, and yet they know the landscape and the political context in which they're living and breathing is against them. And when you start to play in that space, it's always interesting to watch the turn and shift of the mood in that conversation. So we can bring that in. And I think you can do that at a few different levels. So I like to think of this at the global level. So again, what are the laws that are taking place? What is some of the broader sweeping components, right? Even the fact that what do we know? And maybe, I don't know this data specifically, but are there key data points around the pandemic and that link to LGBT individuals, right? And particularly as we go younger, knowing youth in homes that might not be accepted, and the fact that they've now had to be in there for so long, what's that maybe mental health impact? Then there's a local component, and that doesn't necessarily mean jurisdiction in terms of geography of a city, but consider it within the company. So is there a certain division, or is there something you can do on your team? So moving from that global piece or the company-wide piece into a more localized piece. And then lastly, what is that personal side? And how do we bring some of that to light? And sometimes it's not just us. I know it's not surprising, but I wish more people didn't require this, but the few straight white men that I've typically seen in the ally space, it's often because a family member has come out and all of a sudden they have this massive personal connection. I think we can create some of that personal connection and build some of that allyship without them needing it to be a family member. And that personal touch is really important. So whether that's their story or ours, or recognizing, right, what the future is that they want for their family or those others close to them. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll get into questions, is also the last piece in that consideration is what are some of the push factors and what are some of the pull factors, right? There's a lot that we can share that may bring them towards us. And sometimes we need to be behind them. We do need to shake things up, and we do need to push them in the right direction. And so it doesn't all just need to be soft and make sure we're all completely aligned and everyone's happy, we're holding hands, walking forward together. Sometimes they do need that push, but what are the factors and what is the right kind of pressure level and amount to start to build some of that movement and that momentum? So with that, we'd love to jump into a couple questions here. I love this one, and actually, Bachel, I'll ask it to you. If you had 15 minutes with a C-suite leader, what's the one or two questions you would ask, and maybe even the structure to try to get maximum impact?
Mm-hmm. I know this is a terrible way to start it, but it actually depends on who the C-suite leader is, right? So yes. To your point from earlier, knowing where they are in their journey, I'd ask different things. So someone who's a little bit further along, I would focus the discussion on, okay, how is that trickling down into the organization that you lead? And like, I'd I'd actually probably ask them what they're struggling with. Like, what do you know, you've made some progress. What roadblocks are you hitting with your peers to get this further along the way, right? And then if it's someone who isn't very far along, you know, honestly, my questions would be around this whole topic of comfort and discomfort, because I think everybody is so afraid of making someone uncomfortable that we've forgotten that the biggest moments of our growth come from discomfort. And so I think shaping a conversation with someone who hasn't taken those first few steps and letting them, just giving them a preview of what it's going to be like, to take away some of the power of the fear of it, right? Be like, look, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to face this, but shaping what the net positive outcome of taking those first steps is versus some personal embarrassment or anxiety or fear. I think that those are the conversations that I would have. You know, and if I could just give one just piece of advice, like how I've been able to do this for as long as I have, is you have to have a network. So, you know, I have a very good therapist that I talk to. I have a very strong family network and friend network of people that I bounce things off of and talk to. And I've started to take this one person at a time, because you can see real results when you bring someone through a period of change, and then they're empowered to go do it themselves. So I kind of like the network vibe of doing this work.
Love that. And our last question, this conversation has flown by. My apologies to everyone who we did not get to. But, I really like this one of how do we shift everything we've been talking about, which has been a little bit more corporate and bigger, and even the name CEO or diversity councils, et cetera, to where there are maybe a smaller organization, fewer LGBT folks, not a large network, not a large budget, maybe even, you know, an attitude of we don't necessarily need that, right? They don't have the D&I agenda that maybe some larger firms have. How do we take all this information and create impact in a space like that?
And I saw a comment on this. So the coalition approach that I talked about, I actually, in one of my previous companies, we did that. So we had a client too that was very small. They didn't have actually enough people for any of the ERGs. So all of those people got together. And yes, there are differences in what communities will accept as far as LGBTQ, but when you got that group together and they learned from one another, they were able to sort of start through communication, right? So every month there's something that can be talked about in an educational and informative way. And in a lot of ways, there's things that can be done in the voice. So there's a great video of a father of a trans daughter appealing to the state legislature to let his daughter play sports. And I'll tell you, of all the communications I've shared with people on trans topics, that one really hits home because my cis straight friends are hearing it in their own voice. So communication is a very powerful tool.
Amazing. I wish we had more time. The reality is this could be probably a doctoral dissertation of how do we affect change, right, in these kinds of spaces. So as Michael said there in the chat, we will look to answer some of these questions as we move along through the social media platforms that we create spaces on. I know I'm happy if anyone wants to reach out directly to further the conversation or provide more resources. And I've had an absolute pleasure being able to be here with all of you today. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Michael to wrap.
Oh, thank you so much, Zach, and thank you, Bachel, for your time. Bachel, I know you're on holiday as well, so I really appreciate it. And as I said, yes, we will look to kind of reach out to some other team members, perhaps, and get their perspectives on some of these questions, because they're really great as well. In the meantime, do sign up to our newsletter. That's probably the easiest way to hear about upcoming sessions. We do have a session at the end of this month looking at growing older and leaving a legacy, which I'm really excited about. And we also have some in-person events coming up if you're in the UK. So enjoy the rest of your day. See you all soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.